Thank you very much.
Or else I'm going to try. So, genetic data. When we were discussing the codes of conduct yesterday, we said that first, secondary use is very difficult to articulate. And then I said genetic data, and we again said, well, genetic data is very difficult to articulate. So now here I am to tell you secondary use of genetic data. Genetic data is a subject that I have been studying for the last 10 years. I started with my doctoral thesis studying genetic data, and it's really a subject that I am really fond of and obsessed about. The first thing that I wanted to say is that we are all the patient. We were the patient yesterday, we are the patient today, or maybe we will be the patient tomorrow. When we go to the dentist, we are the patient, and we depend on the research that was done before for our treatment. So we are the patient, we are the people, and we are in the center. Anything and everything we say in this context is about the patient, about us. Genetic data is not health data. That everybody knows that genetic data is not health data. Before the GDPR, genetic data was not defined in the directive. It was not part of the special categories. But starting with the GDPR, genetic data is one of the special categories of data. And why is it separated from health data? Because genetic data is not always health data, as Anastasia was telling us before with this example of 23andMe and Heritage and all this direct-to-consumer genetic testing, which doesn't produce genetic data. They produce, don't produce health data. They produce genetic data about filiation in this case. This is exceptional data. Why is it exceptional? The sources are different from the sources of health data. When you break a leg, your doctor writes, Veronica broke a leg, horsing around, and now she's sick. Genetic data, the source of genetic data is an actual test on a sample that produces data about your genetics, about your DNA. It has greater complexity, yes, not only because of the source, but also because of the implications for the data subject. Genetic data doesn't change. If I have, for example, an infectious disease, I have an infectious disease hopefully today, but tomorrow I'm better. Genetic data doesn't change. If I have a genetic predisposition to an illness, I will always have it. So that adds complexity. The longevity of the data adds complexity, the source of the data adds complexity, and the social perception of the data adds complexity. People think that genetic data is predictable, that it can predict a lot of things. It can't. 10 years ago, when I was writing my thesis, I wrote a list of all the direct correlations between genetic data and illness, the direct correlation, and I checked it up 2 weeks ago, and the list of illnesses that can be predicted exclusively by genetic factors directly is the same as it was in 10 years ago, nothing else. So it's not like genetic data can predict everything about you. It can't. There are just a few, but sadly very, very serious diseases. The risk for data subjects is higher because of this sensation that genetic data is predictable, and also because imagine that genetic data could be shared freely with employers, just two cases, employers and insurance companies. You have people who are unemployable and uninsurable. So that is why there's a high risk for data subjects. And then how do we identify data subjects? Because my genetic data is the genetic data of my children and of my parents in certain cases. So who are the data subjects? There's not one data subject, the family. And sometimes the biological group is the data subject. And then assigning, obviously deriving from this, assigning transparency rights. Who do we inform about the processing of this data when there is more than one data subject? And then if this was not complex enough, the right not to know, because there is some genetic information that provides certain information that it's better not to know. Or for some people, it's better not to know, but people have to decide by themselves, do I want to know about this or don't I want to know about this? Not only, again, not only one data subject, but several data subjects. And like I said, the patient is in the center of this, and the truth is that more research based on genetic data is required every day. And we not only need large amounts of genetic data to produce significant results, like in this, just a few biobanks that I used as examples, we also need to study cohorts, to study complex diseases like diabetes, like heart failure. Those are complex diseases. We need to study cohorts, not only isolated genetic data. But that is only part of the story, because if it was only, oh, how do I go back? Like this. If it was only this and this, you could say, well, you can anonymize genetic data and then use it. After all, genetic data is a sequence of A's, C's, G's, and T's. You would never know who that data belongs to. The problem is that to make this data significant, you need genetic data plus demographic data plus lifestyle data and plus health data. So you need complex data sets that contain the genetic data but also contain other identifiers. So that makes it very difficult to anonymize genetic data, which is data that per se can't be anonymized because it's unique to each person. So if you know how to read those A's, C's, T's, and G's, you know that the data belongs to me or to someone else. It's impossible to anonymize genetic data, but if you put more identifiers into the soup, then you have a very complex situation in terms of data protection. So now, the position paper of the DSK. And first, I'm going to tell you what the DSK is. The DSK is the Conference of Data Protection Authorities in Germany. I have had the opportunity to discuss with several of you how the data protection system works in Germany. Each of the Länder has their own data protection authority. So we have a number of them. In the Conference of the Data Protection Authorities, they sometimes publish these position papers. A position paper is not a law, is not a regulation, it's guidance. But it's guidance with teeth. It doesn't have shark teeth, but I would say that it does have dolphin teeth. Why does it have dolphin teeth? Because sometimes when we have nothing else to grab upon to decide, is this compliant, is this not compliant, we look at these position papers as de facto standards for our processing of data. That's why I'm saying, and usually German data protection authorities are usually in agreement. So this is an agreement of the data protection authorities. You can't say, I didn't know. It's right there. They decided, all of them together. So remember dolphin teeth, baby dolphin teeth, which can hurt. So on the 15th of May, they adopted this position paper, and what they advocate for, or not advocate for, what they are telling us that we should implement is a legal framework. And this legal framework has 4 components. It has to provide for high protection and trust requirements. It has to be backed up with sanctions. This is very important. Provide for effective participation of the data subjects, and prohibit research using bodily samples without the knowledge of the data subject. And let's see how this is articulated in practice. Express consent, obviously, for the processing of genetic data, plus technical and organizational measures. And then I wonder, because the position paper sometimes speaks about the data subject and sometimes says the data subjects and some other times says the data subject and her family. So how do we articulate consent when we have more than one data subject and we don't know how to find the other data subjects? Because at the end of the day, we might depend on the data subject to tell us who else could be involved in this express consent process. So I have questions about this. And then the limits of broad consent shall be defined by law. I don't like this because I don't like it. Because the purposes of research in the future are uncertain. I think that again, from the point of view of the patient, I always feel the patient. We need to articulate a way to explain the purposes in very generic ways. We are going to do all this, and we're not going to do all that, so that a broad consent is possible. The legally defined technical and organizational measures are not as problematic as the consent and the definition of the broad consent by law, but they are problematic as well, because we don't know for how long that data will be saved, and we don't know what other mechanisms might be used to re-identify the data subject. This has been a common since I have been studying genetic data. Groups of researchers trying to re-identify the data subject, and more. Now we have a database of 100,000 people. Which of these people are twins? This one and this one. Okay, you got it. And which one is the boy, which one is the girl? I mean, this has been a constant. There are research groups constantly trying to, how do we re-identify people from genetic data sets? So how do we define the terms right now for what's going to happen in 10 years? This is very interesting. These are the proposed protective measures proposed by the DSK. A minimum reflection period and assistance to data subjects and their families to decide on the express consent, and also to decide on the right to know and the right not to know. And this is linked to the second protective measure, information about incidental findings. We have your genetic data today. This is what we can infer from your genetic data today. In 10 years, we might be able to infer more things. So again, how do we articulate that? I think examples would be a great thing. Would you like to know about this, or that in very generic terms so that people can decide? The digital management system, the transparency platform, is at the center of this position paper because it seems to be the solution so that data subjects can be updated about what's going on with their data. The time limit on the validity of consent for secondary use, again, I am completely against. I think that we need to be able to articulate a broad consent that data subjects can decide here and now what they want and what they don't want, and that doesn't have a limit, because what it means is that when the time has run out, you no longer have a legal base to process the data, you need to destroy it. And this data is very valuable from the point of view of the patient and the society at large. Encryption, pseudonymization, again, a bit of a question mark, because we don't know what's going to happen in the future, how this data is going to be re-identifiable in the future. Storage limitation and destruction obligations, obviously, for not only for data, but for samples as well. Disclosure and transmission prohibitions, this is very interesting from the DSK. Subject to sanctions and criminalization of misuse. So criminal sanctions for the misuse of genetic data. Again, remember, in sharing genetic data or, I don't know, releasing genetic data to employers and insurance companies, tragedy for everyone. So I think that criminal sanctions are, I'm sorry, yes, I will be finishing very soon, because I already told you what I don't like. I have a slide on what I don't like. I'll just fly through it. And yes, the procurement and use of genetic data without the knowledge of the data subject, regulated by criminal law. This is not, so, yeah, the special protection for unborn children. Unborn children are more and more being genetically assessed before they are born, so they need to be protected. And legally defined guidelines to preserve the anonymity of data subjects in research results. So further to the position paper, here are all my complaints about the position paper. How do we identify the concerned data subjects? I think that they were brave enough to sometimes say the data subjects and the data subject and her family. Why didn't we use this in the whole document, across the whole document? Because the data subject is the data subject and her family. And then everything that is future, providing information about future uses, asking the data subject if they want to be informed about future incidental findings, future technical and organizational measures. I think that we need to find a way to articulate this with examples so that we don't have to be rewriting the consent over and over again. Again, future. And then the potential solution, according to the position paper, is the digital management system, the transparency platform, because it would allow data subjects to be maintained up to date about what's happening with their data, about new findings, about all the things that we were just discussing. And I was very happy about this, to be honest, digital management system, but then I heard other of you complain about the transparency platform and how will this interact with the EHS? Yeah, so I think that we have to start somewhere. I am I'm optimistic by nature. I think we have to start somewhere and create a platform of sorts, a transparency platform of sorts, at least for the whole of Europe, where we can implement this not only for genetic data, but also for health data. Data subject-wise, it's very complex to decide who are the data subjects about genetic data. And the last thing that I'm going to say, I'm going to leave you with data subjects about genetic data and right to know and right not to know. And that's all I had for you today. Thank you.